record button and you're ready to go.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Since we do have a not huge crowd, but a nice crowd, and we should have the time. I was wondering if people would like to just introduce themselves and just explain in a sentence or two, kind of what your interest is in campaign messaging in terms of, are you thinking of being a candidate, or are you campaign manager? That would just be interesting to know. So I'll tell you what, I'll just sort of call on people in the order they appear on my screen. Fran?
Hi, the host must authorize the video if you want to use the video.
Oh.
But anyway, I'm from the Southbury DTC, and I've worked on a few campaigns for Jeff Damaris for State Senate in the 32nd, and for Rich Boritz, First Selectman of Southbury.
Oh, I know Rich.
Yeah, so I'm here to learn from the master.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Maureen, if you want to turn on people's video, that's also fine. And John?
Also from Southbury, live up in Heritage Village, and I've been getting a new resident for about a year now, and getting a little bit more involved with the Southbury committee, and looking for a place to fit in and getting some training.
Great, thank you. And Robert Clark, you're next on my list.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Robert Clark from the Fairfield DTC, rookie. And I'm not a candidate. I'm looking to help candidates become elected.
Great. And Robert DeCarli.
Hello, I'm from Southbury as well, from the Southbury gaggle that I kind of see here. Yeah, I'm not really planning on running for office this year or next year, but I've been working with Rich Boritz for some of the campaigns he's been working on. I worked with Jeff Damaris for the 32nd. I worked with Greg Cava for the also for the 32nd and also for the 69th. My mom ran for the state senate 2 years ago, so that was an event. So yeah, I'm mostly just here to learn what I could do to help people be better.
Great, thank you. And Nicole?
Hi there, I'm from Wallingford. I've managed campaigns for Kathy Abercrombie in the House 83rd and Jim Jinks against Craig Fishbein this most recent cycle. Also,
there's a sad story. I've spent some time with Mr. Fishbein yesterday.
I don't want to cry, but
yeah, he was inquiring, posing his usual questions in the Judiciary Committee yesterday on some gun bills.
He's just such a treat.
Yeah, he really is.
And now I'm actually exploring a run at Town Council in Wallingford for myself. So.
Great. And Vivian?
Good morning. First, I'm going to say, even if you do restore video, I'm going to stay off. I'm having a massive allergy attack. So, you don't want to see the drippy red nose. Anyway, I am from Southbury, and I've worked on campaigns like at Edelson's and Rich Boritz, and helped in little ways with all our local candidates and like everybody else. But first, I'm going to brag that we're making gains in Southbury. We're getting closer and closer. It's a very Republican town. And I'm hoping to learn something today that the next cycle will put us over the top.
Excellent. And Janet, how are you? You need to
unmute.
There you go.
I'm fine, Jonathan. Thanks a lot. I live in Trumbull. I'm a persistent presence at our town DTC. I'm also co-moderator of Prevail Blue, which is an indivisible action group here in Connecticut. We focus on using social psychology, cognitive science, and political research to improve our communication skills. And that's with voters, people that we know, legislators, when we write LTEs, give testimony, etc. And we offer free seminars and workshops, and we've been doing that for maybe 3 years now.
Yeah. And have you done your session for the campaign school yet?
Not yet. We do it next Tuesday, the 13th.
Well, I would, to the others here, I would recommend that one because Janet and John Gerard know a lot about messaging and have a slightly different kind of take on it than I do, or approach it from a different avenue.
Right.
Peter.
Now that I'm off mute, good morning, everybody. Peter Spores, Newtown DTC. I'm a new member of that, and here to get some training on a topic of longstanding interest.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Gail.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Gail Deutsch. I'm from Canton, and I was elected to the Board of Selectmen last year, 2 years ago, for the first time for a 2-year term. I will be running again in November. And in Canton, we are working very hard to turn things blue, and it seems we seem to be doing well. We want to do better.
Great, thank you for joining us. And Maggie.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm from Easton. I'm on the Easton DTC, and I'm chair of our elections team. And I also will again be volunteering to manage Dave Bindleglass's campaign to be reelected as first selectman. And also in Easton, we're having a great sea change. And for the first time in decades, we have a Democratic first selectman and a Democratic majority on our 3-member Board of Selectmen. And our voter registration is nearly even between Republicans and Democrats, which has never happened before. So it's pretty exciting. And I'm here just to be reminded of all the things we're not doing that we ought to be doing.
Right.
And I'm in California, so it's early in the morning. So I'm drinking coffee, and like someone else said, you don't want to see that.
I'm drinking coffee too, but and Fran.
Hi, my name is Fran. I'm vice chair of the Wallingford Democratic Town Committee, and I've worked with Nicole. We worked on Jim Jinx's campaign. I've worked on many campaigns over the last 5-6 years, and I need probably just a reminder. I'm also chairing or co-chairing the volunteer committee. So everything I pick up here will be a reminder of what I learned eons ago and help train our new volunteers.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. It's really a good crowd and a very experienced and involved crowd. So I hope I have some words of wisdom to impart on you. My name is Jonathan Perloe. Most of my career was in communications. I was on the client side for a while, and then spent the bulk of my career in advertising, and I worked on communication strategy. And so it was my job to sort of help our clients communicate to their customers. And over the past, well, it was actually since the Sandy Hook school shooting, I've been getting more and more involved in legislative advocacy and activism. And it was kind of nice to realize that some of the things that I had learned along the way in advertising actually have some relevance, because it's all about communicating and trying to change people's perceptions. So that is what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to share my screen, and please feel free to jump in with questions if you have them, because it's a reasonable crowd, so that won't be a problem at all. And we'll have time at the end for questions as well. So really the heart of what we are trying to do when we put together campaign communications is change voters' perceptions and ultimately drive a behavior, which is to vote for your candidate or vote for yourself. And so let's start with just talking about what makes a communication effective. And excuse me, this short statement is really, it's connecting what a brand has to offer to what consumers either want or need or aspire to, and doing that in a compelling manner that sets them apart from their competitors. And so a lot of times, with my clients, they'd have a product, and it was a great product, but there was a lot of competitors that also had great products. And so the question was, how are you going to distinguish yourself from others? So if we apply that kind of same notion of what makes an effective marketing communication to political campaigns, you just sort of change a few words, and it's really the same idea. It's how do we connect what a candidate has to offer to what voters want or need or aspire to in a compelling manner that sets them apart from their opponents. That really is the essence of what we're trying to get to. So if we want to connect to people, and whether they are consumers or voters, we need to start by listening. And we talk a lot about canvassing, and the act of canvassing is not only sort of presenting yourselves to the voters, but it's really your opportunity to engage with them one-on-one, and a lot of that has to do with listening. And so, what are they saying? What are they thinking? What's important to them? What are some of their beliefs and perceptions? I think a lot of sort of political communication is trying to break through perceptions that may not be accurate or based on the facts, and today we certainly see more of that than ever before. And then getting to those kind of fundamental wants and needs, and trying to figure out how to sort of translate those wants and needs into things that you have to offer. So before you sort of put pen to paper or keyboard to computer, you really want to articulate for yourself or your candidate what you stand for. And so try to think about what it is you're promising, why voters should believe in that promise, and kind of what qualities define how you will act and how you want to be perceived, once you get in office. So it's not only kind of what you say you're going to do, but a lot of it in politics, I think, is really how you're going to go about doing that and how people view you. And I think this kind of gets to what we would typically call character, and so we talk sometimes about character being as important as your positions or your beliefs. So this is a construct that tries to bring together all the different things that can kind of drive your communications. And it really starts with your promise to voters, and it really should be to constituents, because at some point you will not just represent your voters, you want to represent your constituents. And so spend some time thinking about what's the kind of singular thing that you want to be defined. You want to define your time in office as being, what benefits is it going to bring to your constituents? And a lot of times you'll come up with a list of things, and part of the secret to good communications is to ladder up to some bigger idea. And because you will want to talk about your platform, and there may be 5 different things in it, but you want people to come away with an impression of you and what it is that you stand for. And it can take a little time to sort of synthesize that into something that's meaningful, and not sort of just I'm for making people's lives better. You want it to have some substance. Once you come up with that promise or what you stand for, you want to think about, okay, how am I going to get people to believe that that's true? And so think about the credentials you have, the experiences that you have done either in public life or in your private life or in your professional life, qualities about you, all the things that kind of would, if coming together, makes your promise credible. And those are still sort of like, I would call them, let's say, themes. And then below that, you want to think, okay, so if one of the things that should lead people to believe in what it is that I'm trying to promise them is that I'm accessible, let's say. Well, then think of some actual proof points, some examples in your life that demonstrate that you are in fact accessible or trustworthy, or whatever the other platform ideas are. And think of this together as, obviously not every communication is going to talk about all these things, but this sort of becomes your palette to draw from, and you want to make sure that your communications sort of link back to this so that over time and collectively they're telling a story and it's not just a bunch of sort of random ideas that you're throwing out there. So once you have this sort of core thing, the two other areas to think about are kind of behaviors and values. And again, things that you want to draw out in how you communicate. And remember, communications in a campaign are also spoken communication. So when you deliver campaign speeches and whatnot. So what are the characteristics that will guide how you act in office and how you solve problems? And what are some of the core values that will drive how you make decisions and how you develop policies? And so all these things can, again, you come up with them, they define you and who you are as a candidate, and they provide opportunities for you to talk about yourself and talk about your platform. And again, the idea of sort of documenting this is you can come back to this when you're creating communications and make sure that these things are coming out in your communications. And again, it's not every communication can touch on all these things, but you do want to sort of, have them appear regularly so that people start to form an image or a perception of who you are as a candidate and what you will drive. Some candidates, may want to come up with a campaign slogan, which sometimes can be the hardest thing. So you're trying to distill all this stuff into, one idea. And I wouldn't say this is essential for driving a good campaign, but it's something that you may want to think of. And some of these can be very powerful, like yes, we can. So this is what we call the messaging foundation, and it's just a foundation. So it's not your policy platform per se, but it informs your communications. It serves as a reference for deciding whether, if you, let's say you're writing a speech, and you can kind of go back and say, have I touched on these things that I'm trying to get people to believe, touched on the reasons why I'm trying to get people to believe in me? Or does it provide some evidence of why I'm saying that I would be good in office? But it clearly has to be brought to life with your own narrative. And as I said before, clearly not every communication can get across this whole messaging platform or foundations. There's just too much stuff in it. So one thing, so once you've kind of gone through this exercise and put all this information together, you want to kind of step back and say, okay, do I think this is good or not? And how do I assess whether this is good? And so remember, we started in the beginning about talking about listening to voters and what their concerns and desires and wants are. So you want to ask yourself, okay, are the things that I'm going to be talking about and the values that I have and the reasons for believing in me, are they relevant to what voters care about? And so you want to make sure that you are connecting with them. Are you making sort of credible promises that sort of within the scheme of things seem reasonable? Can you deliver on it? And this kind of gets into some of the reasons to believe and the proof points of, can you demonstrate in your background and your experience that you actually have done some of the things in some way or another that you're saying that you're going to be able to do? And as I talked about, sometimes we call this like a messaging ladder, because the idea is all these not disparate, but all these elements should tie up to something, a bigger idea. And then the last one is, is it ownable? Does it make you distinct relative to your competition or your other candidates that are running? And this is, in a sense, probably a little bit more true of if you're running in a primary, when you're likely to be running against people that have sort of, similar positions and similar ideas. Once you get to a general election, it's probably a little easier to sort of distinguish yourself from the other person. But I think, if you kind of think about it, at a high level, a lot of candidates are trying to say the same thing, regardless of what party they're from. So you want to make sure that what you're saying really is going to distinguish yourself from your competitors. And that doesn't necessarily mean, let's say you do share some things in common. It's not to say, well, I guess I shouldn't stand for this, but I need to be somebody different so that I'm distinct. It doesn't mean that. It just means, am I telling my story in a distinctive way? And so you might want to think about, if you are both standing for some particular policy, is there something that you've done that kind of distinguishes you from your opponents? We can think of most communications as sort of little mini experiences, and whether it's an email or a direct mail communication, you want to get people's attention. You then want to engage them in the conversation. You want to presumably, educate them or tell them about something, and you want that to be convincing. And in some communications, but not all, you want them to take some kind of action. In campaign communications, it really is the bulk of it is about changing perceptions so that at a very specific point in time they take an action, which is to vote for you. But it's sometimes, and some communications are not as expansive as others, and so this doesn't always appeal, or this doesn't always apply. But the idea of thinking about when the email shows up in the inbox, there's only one thing that that people see. It's your name and the subject line, and you have to get noticed. And when they open the email, within the first couple of lines, are you doing something, saying something that's going to engage them enough to get them to read the rest of the communication and achieve your desired outcome? So that leads to another really important thing about communications. And in my experience working with clients, a lot of times the discussion would sort of start with, well, I want to do an ad that does shows this, or I have this great idea. But to be effective, communications need to start out with a purpose. And in general, what I mean by a purpose is, what outcome are you looking for after the person has heard your speech, or opened your email, or even to a lesser extent seen a post of yours on social media? What are you trying to get at? And not get at, what are you trying to get out of it? So are you just trying to create awareness that you exist and that you're in the race? Are you trying to inform them of some particular part of your campaign platform? Are you trying to drive preference, which in general, I'd say most of our campaign communications, that is something that they're looking to do. Some may be more about, sort of changing people's attitudes and perceptions, and others may be to take action, like, I'm having a campaign rally and I want you to show up. Others may be about spreading the word and getting other people involved or other people interested, and then some of your communications may be about fundraising. So kind of start out with, like, what am I trying to achieve with this communication before you start detailing it. And then you have a number of sort of tactical decisions that you should think through for each of your communications. So who specifically are you talking to? And it may be a segment of the electorate. Where are you going to find them? And so is it best to reach them through direct mail or online advertising? And so there's a number of different communications channels that you have at your disposal, and you kind of want to try to figure out where are you most likely to reach those people. And then you have to put a little bit of thought into how valuable is this outcome to you, because every communication, or most communications, come with a cost. And even if it's not a cost of the media in terms of printing and postage, or online advertising costs, there's certainly a cost in time and effort of you or your campaign staff. And so the next two things are kind of a trade-off of what's the most effective way to reach somebody versus what's the most efficient way to reach them. And those are always going to be a trade-off. And usually, obviously, the higher impact types of communications are more expensive. And that's why you have to kind of think about how valuable is the outcome. What the tool that we use and I continue to use for, sort of important communications that I'm going to invest a fair amount of time in is putting together this little communication brief. And this can be done, sort of simply just to get some basic things down, or if it's, let's say you're designing your, your campaign leave behind, that is really going to be an important piece of your communications, and you're going to use it, hundreds or thousands of times. You actually might want to spend more effort on doing something like this. So it it asks a series of questions to hone what your message is going to be and what you're going to try to say. So, who are you trying to reach? What outcome are you looking for? So what do you want them to think or do as a result of seeing this communication? Spend a little time of kind of what's standing in the way of success. What are some of the current perceptions that people have, either about you or about maybe your party or your positions, and try to articulate, what it is that's keeping them from either doing what you want them to do or what you want them to think. And then we come down to what's called the insight, and this can be summed up as trying to articulate what's the key thing that drives this voter's perceptions. And this may this kind of relates back to the very first step in the process where we talked about listening. And so when we talk about political campaigns and representing people, a lot of times this critical belief or this insight is going to be about what really matters to them and why. And then think about, and this kind of goes back to the promise that we talked about earlier, is what is it that you stand for? What promise are you going to deliver on? And then you kind of get into the meat of the communication is, okay, what's going to make this credible and believable? And so if you kind of go through these steps, you're essentially building the skeleton of what will become your communication, and you need to make sure that you address all these things. One question that comes up frequently, and obviously has a lot to do with how much money you have, is like, how many times do I need to say the same thing? Like if I'm doing, let's say I'm just doing a direct mailer to registered voters, like how many times do I need to send it to them? And the fact is that usually, particularly within the budgets that we have available to us, you really can't over communicate. And there's been all sorts of studies on how many exposures does it actually take for somebody to recall a message, and it's up in the the 7, 8, 9 range before they kind of get it. And recognizing, depending on how well funded your opponents are, they're hearing from other people as well, and so that can make it a little bit harder to break through. But in general, the problem is not communicating too much, it's communicating too little. So just to, keep bouncing back. Actually, and before I do that, well, I'll do that afterwards. So just kind of summing up, we want to establish a foundation that's going to guide your communications. We want to make sure that whenever you're communicating, you have a purpose or a desired outcome from that communication, or collectively from all your communications. Before you start writing stuff, really map out what you want to say, to whom you want to say it, in what channel, and how you're going to reach them. Repeat your message consistently, and this is why having that campaign messaging foundation or platform makes sense, because you can kind of look at, for example, all the emails that you're writing or even your social media posts, and make sure, am I kind of getting my message across repeatedly and consistently? Am I saying the same thing, so that if people are listening to me, they kind of come away with, oh, I understand what that candidate stands for, and I understand why I should believe in them and why they're worthy of voting for. And then lastly, in those communications where you actually want the voter to do something, just make it obvious and keep it singular. There's sometimes a temptation to, let's say in email communications, it's, I want you to do this and I want you to do that. People do have limited attention spans. And so particularly when you're looking for action, keep it very focused on that. And that can be as simple as things like if you're doing an email and you have various links in there, and what you really want them to do is, I don't know, register for an event, don't kind of distract their attention by having links to other, here's the links to my campaign platform, and here's a link to a speech I gave last week. Just keep it focused on, I want you to register for this event, and kind of don't give them other avenues to leave your communication without doing the thing that you want. What I thought I would do is share with you sort of what a communication kind of messaging foundation looks like. This is not for a candidate. It happens to be for the organization that I work for, but it kind of gives you a sense of how this platform comes together. So as we think about what Connecticut Against Gun Violence stands for, our promise to our supporters is that more than any other gun violence prevention organization, CAGV will make your advocacy in Connecticut and your financial support help save lives. And so we're trying to here very clearly distinguish ourselves from, there's a lot of other gun violence prevention organizations, particularly national ones, and how are we going to stand out from them? And as we think about when we communicate with people, and particularly, if we're doing fundraising, what are the reasons that you should believe that, in fact, your work with CAGV is going to have more impact than kind of supporting other organizations or getting engaged with other organizations? It's because we have an unmatched track record of legislative success in Connecticut. We have very strong long-standing relationships with influencers and stakeholders in the state. We are an authority on Connecticut gun laws and legislative process, and we have a very strong base of supporters that gives us a lot of impact. And then we have a set of values, so that as we, when we're acting and speaking, these are the things that we stand for. And when people interact with us and see our communications, we want them to come away with a feeling that, this is an organization that is confident and convincing, that we're vigilant and also compassionate. So this kind of gives you a sense of how you can, just in not so many words, distill what it is that you stand for into something that can then drive your communications. And it really serves as sort of a check to, when you're preparing a communication, to look back and say, am I talking about the things that I want to talk about that I think are going to make a difference? So with that, I will stop and see if there's any questions I can answer, or help with, or explain.
So Jonathan, it's Robert. I have one
Yes.
quick question. If you could go back to that slide, that was a great slide, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they're all great slides. So
thank you.
Yeah. So I have a question on the personality box, and I forget who it was here, who's the neuroscience person. Maybe they could chime in too. So this is the personality of the organization, or in a different context, sort of the personality traits of the candidate that they want to project, right?
Correct. Correct.
Are you looking to match the messaging with people, voters or constituents who also have those same personality traits, because you're going to have the strongest, a confident person will connect better with a confident person?
Oh, that's a good question. I wouldn't say necessarily, because you're a candidate and you're going to be in a very different role than, obviously, the voter, the constituent. And so you want something that people may connect with. So you certainly want to look for a connection, but it may be that, and I'm trying to think of a specific example, that in some ways you do want the voter to see themselves in you, so that, because remember, unlike in advocacy or marketing commercial products, you aren't representing the person, right? in those other situations, but here you are. So you do want to look for some connection, but I wouldn't say that you're only trying to kind of find like-minded people from a personality perspective. Yes, certainly like-minded, probably more so you're looking for like-minded people on the values side. And so because the values are something that I'm going to identify with, and they have to represent my values. So I think that's probably the more important place to find commonality. And again, none of this is to say that you want to make up stuff, but is to sort of look at your own, who you are and what your experiences are, and try to draw out those things that both are going to support what it is that you stand for and connect with voters. But clearly it has to be authentic. So, unlike a brand, which sort of is a, at least at the very outset, is a somewhat clean slate. You can kind of form it the way you want to. Obviously, you can't do that with yourself.
Thank you.
Does that help answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you.
And Robert, did you have a question? Oh, sorry, Janet.
If somebody else was first, I defer.
Okay.
You were going to call on somebody else.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, real quick. Do you know if we would be able to get a copy of this PowerPoint? Because it was very good PowerPoint.
Okay. Yes, it is. There's a Google Drive site, and all the different speakers' presentations either are or will be posted, and I posted mine there, including a Word document that has that communication brief in it. Fran.
Once a candidate has established their platform and they have their broad platform up on their website, I'm particularly interested in mailers. Is there a magic number of bullet points that should be mentioned on mailers? How many different topics should a mailer cover when your funds are limited?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you do better by having fewer than more, and it kind of depends what those bullet points stand for, but presumably they're kind of like positions or things they care about. And it can be a little tempting to, so let's say it's topics that people care about, so education, the environment, whatever. And it's a little tempting to let me put on as much as I can, so so that I make sure that I connect with everybody. And that then risks the thing of what do you really stand for? And it's like, okay, you're good for everything, and I don't so much believe in that. And one of the things that can help you, and kind of one of the reasons we kind of build these messaging ladders, is can you try to find some commonalities between these different areas that can ladder up to something bigger. And so let me try to think of an example. Maybe one of them might be economic opportunity. And so instead of listing kind of four different policy areas you believe in, those all ladder up to greater economic opportunity for, I don't know, whomever. And then under that, you could then maybe mention some specific areas, or again, depending on your campaign funds, you might have a mailer that specifically focuses on, here's why I'm strong on creating economic opportunity, and here's some of the things I've done. So you then kind of have a natural way of having sort of themed communications. Certainly in like emails, you could do that because they're obviously a little cheaper. But I would say, to throw out a number, I think, 5 to 7. I don't think I'd go beyond that.
Thank you.
Janet. You're on mute.
I muted, I unmuted, I got confused, I forgetful, whatever. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I wanted to follow up on something Robert was talking about in terms of the neuroscience, and I think, I mean, our presentation is going to talk a lot about values and what we have learned about reaching people in different places. In other words, we don't only want to talk to our base. We want to talk to what some people are calling the middle, or what George Lakoff calls biconceptuals, and how you do that. And there are a lot of organizations out there who are looking at how we frame things so that we can reach our different kinds of audiences. So targeting our audiences are really important. And the other thing is, Analyst Institute publishes a lot of field research work. And they have, from what I'm recalling, there are quite a few studies that talk about the diminishing returns at a certain point of repetition, although it's obviously critical because that is how things get stuck in our synapses. And, they suggest, varying your modality of outreach, whether it's using digital, changing your mailers, using postcards. Obviously, the content of all these things is critical, but they suggest changing that up so that that you reduce the amount of diminishing returns from repetition.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, when we think of sort of integrated communications, it's about using different channels to reach people, but you'd want to make sure that while each channel may have some unique characteristics that lends itself to one thing or another, you want to have consistent messaging across the channels. And yeah, I think, Janet, was actually you or John that had mentioned I was trying to find the name of the book from George Lakoff, is it?
The all new Don't Think of an Elephant.
Yeah.
If you folks haven't read it, it's an absolute kind of basic handbook.
It was very interesting. Yeah, so it definitely gives you some things to think about.
A handbook for what? In what way is it a handbook?
Like, I guess, persuasion. Janet, would you say that's kind of the best way of?
Yeah, he's a cognitive scientist, a philosopher, a linguist, and he talks about how we can make connections with people using language, metaphor, framing, and that you will have multiple aha moments when you read this book. There's
a lot to take away there. Yeah.
It's absolutely wonderful, and there are a multitude of organizations working right now to help us build frames on any issue that you could possibly imagine. And it's brilliant because it's all evidence-based stuff. Right. And we don't use it enough.
Yeah, and it can be, it's challenging because I got to get the email out tonight, and so sometimes hard, which is you don't want this sort of messaging platform or foundation to be a weight around your communications, but it is a way to kind of refer back and say, this is my speech about my environmental platform, and in that, am I bringing out some of the things that I've talked about wanting to bring out in my communication? So it's sort of a way of checking back and making sure that you're emphasizing the points that you think together are going to distinguish you and make you a preferred candidate.
I have another question. Can you put up the communications brief slide again, please?
Yeah.
And so my first takeaway is not my first takeaway, but as we went through this, I'm thinking, all right, this is overall comm strategy.
Yeah.
That one. Yes, please. Thank you. So front end of the campaign, mapping out your positions as you've gone through with your promise, et cetera, and articulating your values, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the plan, and then the battle begins, right? And so then your opponent inserts like a wedge issue, and that could be something that I think we saw in the most recent cycle, if you're a moderate, a progressive issue that you may not really fully support gets inserted, or if you're a progressive, they try and dilute you with a moderate position. And again, not trying to say one is better than the other, but they insert these issues to try and water down your sort of the core things you want to articulate. Do you go back as a piece of campaign strategy now? Do you go back like to this type of document and say, okay, here's how we're going to counter that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Practical kind of question.
Yeah, and I think particularly honing in on, okay, so let's say we feel like that opponent's attack or characterization of you is working. I think the area to focus in on, like a sort of a response brief, if you want, is, okay, so what perception or what are voters thinking as a result of that perception, and what do you want them to think? And then you fill in the kind of the things in the middle, which is, why don't they believe this about me? And then you can start working. So you want to hone it down to, what are the barriers to getting the voter to think of you in the way that you want them to think of you? And then how can you address that? And so if it is, I think a lot of this probably does boil down to things that you can talk about in your background or experience or what you've done to, suggest that the candidate should believe in you. But I do think in particular, it really, a lot of it gets back to the very beginning, is what do voters either think about you or the topic, or what do they need, and trying to figure out how to connect to that need, and showing it's really about showing how you're relevant in addressing their needs, but taking into account where they are today or where they are now.
And I'm thinking I'm going to give an example that happened down here. And it almost seems like you would want to sort of map out a potential response brief. Love that name. A response brief for things that might come along, so you're prepared, right? And so here's the example. So we had defund the police was making all sorts of headlines, and the Republican challenger all of a sudden has Facebook ads with the flashing red and blue lights, and it's like talking, not accusing our candidate of supporting that, just putting that out there, that supporting the Republicans means you support the police. And it's like, first of all, we have to obviously know whether or not it's really relevant to the people we're trying to convert from the middle. But there's like a certain, it's like, I saw that and it's like, I'm getting angry, man. It's like, we gotta, we can't let them do that. We can't let them define us. We've got to make sure that we're in charge of our own definition. And it's like some of those things, like, I wasn't running a campaign, I was just volunteering, but it's like, does that deserve a response? Does it, and or do we just let that go because we're focused on those convertible votes in the middle? So that's just kind of that's where that's coming from, that kind of strategic question.
As you're talking about that, it kind of strikes me that in the world of political communication, something happens that happens much less frequently in commercial communications, which is the attacks.
Yeah.
And so, most brands don't go, after the other, they don't go after the competitor as directly as political candidates go after their opponents, which does raise a whole new level of, not only are you trying to, get people, to control the narrative, so people understand what you think. You're meanwhile, you have to work on all this other stuff of kind of fending off all these attacks.
Right.
And I think at least, and so I'm not sure I have a great answer on like what things you should, respond to versus not. Certainly to the degree you can get a sense of, does it have any traction, is important. But when you do, so let's say you decide that you do want to respond, it is kind of continuing to go through like, okay, is my response going to continue to reinforce the things that I stand for, or am I just sort of, kind of counterattacking, and is that pulling me off message? And so I wouldn't go so far as to say, you should ignore things that are distractions, but you want to make sure that how you respond is not only addressing the distraction, but further reinforcing the things that you want to say in the first place.
Right, and so back over to, is it Janet? Are you the neuroscience person? Right, so you're going right to, the fear level. You're going right down the level, Maslow #1, basic survival and fear. And it was ugly, and I think we probably should anticipate it's going to continue to be ugly for a while. There's embedded ugliness in the other side. So.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Jonathan said. We essentially want to try not to be in defense mode. In other words, we want to be out in front of the attacks. We need to anticipate them and to reinforce our values, using language that resonates with our base if we're talking to our base, and using language that resonates with conservatives if that's who we're addressing. We want to try to be in front of this, and we need to always fall back on what our values are and what our positions are on things, but not to be reactive in the defense mode, and hardly ever using the language of our opponents.
Yeah. But Robert, I think one of the things you said, which is really important, is about anticipating things. And I don't know if it's true in a lot of races, but certainly in some of these races, these people have run before. And so, you can kind of look back and see what they were saying last time round, and, see how they acted and behaved, which is probably a pretty good predictor of how they will do so going forward.
Yeah, it's like, it's like everything you've ever read about, even like military strategy, where we're fighting the last war, and you've got to anticipate the next one.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then to put in a pitch for the other thing that I'm working on, which is ranked choice voting. If we can get there will be less negative advertising, or less negative attacking. So that's my mini plug for ranked choice voting. Anything else I can help answer? Yes, Fran.
You may have already done it, but I'm having trouble putting into action what you've already said. We have traditionally had the Republicans completely lie about a week before the election. This has happened multiple years. How do we combat this? There's not enough time to put out statements to get to everybody. There's not enough phone banking you can do, because they completely take it hook, line, and sinker. Can we prevent it from the beginning? I mean, I hate to be defensive, but
yeah, no.
It's just that's their game plan. They do it almost every year.
Right. Well, so I think part of it is the anticipation, being able to anticipate that. And so can we hopefully lay some of the foundation so that when that attack comes along, it's less believable, because we have built ourselves or our candidate up to, not be that person.
Which we actually did. It was so frustrating that people decided, oh, well, he said a lie, and they claimed that he said a lie when in fact he didn't say that lie. And people can go to his website and verify that was what was on there. It was unbelievable how much power they had with that lie.
Yeah, I think one of the other things to think about just in the area of sort of campaign communications is kind of having people speak on your behalf, or surrogates that may be able to say things in a more direct way that the candidate might not want to say themselves, and so you have people kind of, you know, protecting your flanks. Robert?
Yeah, actually, so I have kind of piggybacking off of that. So, you know, my question is, hypothetically, this is what I would think would be the way I would respond, and I just kind of wanted your two takes on it, is if they do this every year, then like a week or two beforehand, you could just write a letter to the editor or something and say, hey guys, they do this every single year. There was this point, this point, this point. When they inevitably do it this year, please don't believe them. Would that, but that's kind of not necessarily a core message. It's not a core campaign belief. So I would think you would have a surrogate of some sort do that, since it's a pretty much explicitly 100% negative.
Yeah.
Is that the way you would handle it? Is that the appropriate use for surrogates? Is there a better way of doing that?
Yeah. So I think it's certainly an appropriate way. The question, I think the key question is, to what degree should the candidate respond? And I guess I would, so one, there is this interesting notion of timing. And so, you know, can you, you know, kind of be ready, or actually have already planned to kind of come out with your, you know, your quote unquote response at the same time that, you know, you expect them to come out with their attack. And so there's probably something to that.
That's
you know,
the problem. We don't know what they're going to come out with.
It's just that they're going to come out with something, right?
Right. We have no, I mean,
Um,
what they came out with our really good mayoral candidate was just bizarre.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah.
They just made it up.
Yeah. It was interesting. I used to be on the Greenwich DTC, and it was quite a few years ago, but we did some kind of research to try to better understand, you know, what our messaging strategy should be. And I was kind of curious about the whole area of kind of negative, you know, negative messaging and things like that. And one thing that, you know, I tried to ask some questions to get at that, you know, just, you know, how do people feel about it, and so on and so forth. And there's, I think, a difference between negative campaigning versus responding to attacks. And so calling your opponent to account for things that are, you know, inaccurate or outright lies, or talking about their record in a factual way, in the survey anyway, wasn't perceived as negative campaigning per se, which is to say, so holding your opponent to account and pointing out their record doesn't, you know, support, you know, their values or the things that you stand for. You can do that, you know, you don't, that is okay. I think that's okay. It's sort of the, you know, the unsubstantiated attacks. It's also, a lot of it's the tone. And so you can kind of separate out the tone from what it is you're saying. So you can, quote unquote, attack your candidate for holding this position or voting that way. But if you do it in a way that is saying, you know, this person says they stand for X, but their record shows otherwise, I wouldn't really characterize that necessarily as an attack or negative campaigning. Fran?
That was going to be my question. How much time should you spend once you've done your opposition research against your opponent? How much time should you spend getting ahead of that and presenting, you know, what their failures compared to what you hope your accomplishments will be?
Yeah. Well, and I think that is definitely an area where surrogates can play a really important role. You know, let the surrogates point out all the failings of the other candidate, and so it you know, it gets it out there without you having to, you know, seem like you're too negative.
So the candidate really shouldn't be bringing up these points. You should leave it to your surrogates.
I don't want to say they shouldn't bring it up, but it put it this way, it relieves the pressure, the need to, if you can get other people to say it, and particularly, you know, other people that, you know, maybe are, you know, credible and, you know, have some, you know, sort of reason to be saying that and come across as being credible or influential. So, but I, you know, I think if, you know, if you're talking, you know, let's say you're talking about, you know, my support for voting rights, and I think it is okay to point out, and, you know, and even to a degree in written communications, or maybe it's a, you know, letter to the editor or op-ed that the candidate is running, to point out where your candidate stands on it, and, you know, as long as it's factual. And so if you can point to, you know, a vote they took or something they said, you know, you use the other candidate's words against them. So it's like, I'm not making this up. It's like, this is what the candidate said, you know, there's, you know, voter fraud is rife in Connecticut, and that's why we can't do, you know, early voting or no excuse absentee voting, whatever the topic is. So.
Thanks.
Janet. Mute. Unmute. Okay.
Just to respond to Fran L's comments about last minute issues, we had one in Trumbull as well, like that, about a week before the election. And it was a particularly egregious attack with untruth. And so our first selectman did a video storm. I mean, we just had to do it. So that's how she responded to it. And that, you know, she circulated that, you know, digital video everywhere. So
yeah,
it's happening.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, and it's hard for, you know, the campaigns we're talking about are not, you know, funded with hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you know, one thing is, to the extent that you can get a sense of whether these, you know, attacks are breaking through, you know, is helpful. And, you know, sometimes it might be a lot of noise that, you know, people, you know, it's not really making a difference. But that obviously requires a, you know, some level of resources to be able to do polling and surveying. But, you know, sometimes even, you know, I guess if you can, you do need to be a little careful of, you know, turning to all your kind of, you know, the people that, you know, which may not, you know, they're probably not representative of the electorate. And so be a little careful about, you know, how they're responding versus how the general population or the general electorate may be responding. Okay, I think that kind of brings us, oh, sorry, Fran.
I just want to say thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, everybody. The presentation will be posted, and, you know, if you have questions, I can try to help get Democrats elected. Let me know. I'm all for that. It is encouraging to see what I was hearing about some in, you know, Southbury and elsewhere, where Democrats are edging up. And I know in Greenwich, for the first time, I don't know if it's ever, but there are now more registered Democrats than Republicans. So we are making progress. So keep up all the good work, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's very good.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Maureen. Bye-bye.
Bye.